We wanted to welcome you all into this space as well. And before we jump into the PowerPoint, we'll also be doing some introductions of ourselves in just a minute. Wanted to really be transparent with you all about kind of what we're hoping to do today in this space together. We're really looking for this to be more of a participatory dialogue between us and you and everyone together, and to really have you engage in the material, participate in conversation. We'll be sending you into breakout rooms to chat amongst each other, to talk about some discussion questions a couple of times. But we'd really like for you to be kind of here with us, present and engaged. Also understanding that that's not possible for everyone. It is a conference. Some people are still working and maybe just have this on in the background. We understand that. But if it's possible, we'd love to have you be really active in your participation this morning. And with this topic, what we're really hoping to get out of it is to kind of stretch into some new spaces, to really look at what can we be doing together to move forward, and what can that look like. And we're going to ask that you really kind of push yourself to think in new ways while you're with us this morning. Anything else that I'm forgetting, Brittyn?
No, I think that's it. And so, yeah, I think we can pull up the PowerPoint and get started here.
I did forget to say that it's Star Wars Day.
It is. May the
Very
4th be with us
Yes.
all.
I know. All right, cool.
I'm offended.
Yes. Right, just end the call. All right, cool. So we'll jump into this PowerPoint and we'll get started.
Yeah, and for you all, my background is the ruins of the Death Star. I like it because it's the ruins of Empire, and it seems fitting today. So
Yes. All right. So today we're going to be talking about constructive disruption, centering justice and lived experience in systems change. My name is Tim Saubers, and I'm presenting with Brittyn, and we'll each kind of take a second to do some intro. As we're going through this, we'd love to have you participate in the chat. If you have thoughts or you have questions or anything's resonating with you, please feel free to chime in. Like I mentioned earlier, we'll be going into breakout rooms, so you'll have a chance to talk amongst yourselves as well. So my name is Tim. I use he, him, his pronouns, and for accessibility, I am a light-skinned Latino man with black hair and black glasses on. I'm wearing a Jurassic Park t-shirt, and I'm sitting in front of some appliances and cabinets. I will name as well that I tend to speak extremely quickly. So if I'm speaking too quickly for you and you need me to slow down, please just let me know. Or if I'm speaking too quickly for the captions to keep up with, also please let me know and I will slow down. I have worked in peer support services for just about 5 years. It'll be 5 years in August, with experiences in direct service work, particularly around crisis services. So people experiencing homelessness, having thoughts of suicide. What's typically, when I'm saying crisis services, I'm referring to crisis kind of as they've been defined by clinical standards. So crisis services, peer support, peer supervision, program management and development at the state and national levels. I do have experience managing a state certification program for peer workers and developing that program, as well as doing work nationally for technical assistance and some offerings as well. When I'm doing peer support and really any work that I do, I'm really interested in centering peer values like mutuality and empathy, along with equity, justice, and accessibility in all of my work. I think if we're not centering those values, so many people get left behind and we're losing so many voices that really could be helping to push us forward and that really just need to be at the table when we're doing this work. So I'm excited to be in this space together with you all. I'm going to pass it over to Brittyn.
all right, and hello everyone. My name is Brittyn Calyx. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and sie, them, zier. Either set of pronouns there is equally wonderful. I am the Peer Specialist Program Communications Assistant at Access to Independence, which is an independent living center that holds the contract for the Wisconsin Peer Specialist Deployment Initiative. That's the statewide certification initiative that Tim referred to earlier. We used to work together on that. And so I've been a certified peer specialist in Wisconsin since 2014. I've also offered peer support and been in supervisory peer support roles also in Massachusetts. before coming back to Wisconsin to work on this initiative as well. So something a little bit about like the values I bring into my work, a lot of the same as what Tim said, but something I wanted to stress today too is that like learning is such a huge piece of peer support, and I think how we grow and shift towards better worlds, right? For everyone, where people are free to give and receive support, where there are fewer like gates holding people back. Because when I think about the conversation today, a conversation about disrupting systems of oppression or established service systems that try to do good and also are set up in cultures of white supremacy and other systems of oppression. I know that myself, I am not I didn't come into peer support with the framework, with different understandings or approaches that I hold today, right? And so my experiences have taught me a lot. My connections and relationships have taught me a lot. And so I just want to hold that today too, that we learn from our experiences and our work to improve the world around us and what people are able to do. So as we envision more just systems, new systems, let's also hold that learning front and center.
Perfect.
Oh yeah, and sorry, for accessibility notes too, I am a 30-something white trans woman with brown hair. I'm wearing black blazer today, and my Zoom background is the ruins of the Death Star throne room. So yeah, for May the 4th.
Right. So before we jump into the kind of the conversation discussion, we wanted to talk about some shared values that we're bringing into the space and that we're hoping you're bringing as well. So we're kind of coming into this space with the assumption that all of you have kind of a basic understanding of some of these values. We're going to talk about what they mean just a little bit, but we're hoping that in this space, we're not going to be spending a lot of time essentially going through kind of what is anti-racism, what is anti-oppression 101 for the duration of the presentation. We're coming in from the standpoint that these are established values that everyone in this space shares, that we're all going to hold together, and that we're not going to hold space for kind of devil's advocates or those who are saying like, what about this? Or, you know, trying to center the voices of people who are already have access to these services or who are benefiting from systems. So the first two, anti-racism and anti-oppression, we're going to kind of talk through what we're talking about when we mean these things. And so when we're talking about being anti-racist and taking stances of anti-oppression, it's really moving into the action space from knowledge. You know, first it's that understanding of kind of what does racism mean? What is it? What is my role in perpetuating racism, intentionally or unintentionally? How do I benefit from systems of power and existing systemic structures, both mental health and substance use service systems, but also services, also systems generally speaking, such as the way society is structured. And then to go into the space of anti-racism and anti-oppression is to actively do something to fight against it, to name when we're seeing racist acts take place, to work internally to recognize what our role is and to do something to change that role. Are we going out of our way to elevate the voices of people who are not at the table? Are we finding ways to step back when it's appropriate and to sit down so that other people can have a chance to speak up? Are we moving out of the way, and who are we supporting when we're talking about taking anti-racist and anti-oppressive stances, not only personally, but also professionally?
And do you just want to go down the list, and I can also speak a little bit on it too?
Yes. Yeah, so then equity and justice. So equity is not the same thing as equality. When we're talking about equity, it's making sure that where everyone has access to these things. And so we're meeting the needs to get people to have their needs met. So I often think of kind of that, there's a visual that I think of where they're saying equality is everybody standing kind of on the same box to look over a fence. but only one person's tall enough to see over that fence with the box. But equity would be giving everyone the number of boxes they need in order to be able to see over that fence. So for some people, it's 3 boxes. For some people, it's 1. For some people, it's 0. But it's making sure that everybody has what they need to get their needs met. And then justice as defined by the people who have been harmed by systems, or the people who are wanting that justice, rather than what I think justice would look like, and supporting those communities and those groups as they move towards justice, how that looks like for them. And for me, a large piece of this is approaching things through an abolitionist lens and understanding that incarceration and law enforcement are not justice, but that we need to explore new ways of looking at what does justice mean and how do we bring those values into the work we're doing. And then lastly is collective liberation. So when I'm doing work and when we're doing work, are we pushing and advocating and disrupting for everyone, or are we focused solely on what will benefit myself and my own community, and what do I need? And are we able to understand that sometimes for collective liberation, we don't always get to take center stage, that means sometimes we need to be, well, not sometimes, always, we need to be centering the voices of the most marginalized people, the people who have been most harmed. And when we're talking about collective liberation, for me also means we're looking at anti-capitalism, we're looking at abolition, we're looking at just totally different ways of understanding what society can look like, as well as mental health and substance use service systems. We're looking at mutual aid groups, we're looking at community care, we're looking at alternatives to law enforcement, really taking a more macro standpoint than just the one system that we're working in.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, things I would just add on there from, my own, what I'm bringing into the space too around these values here is that, like, I want to expand a little bit on the collective liberation piece. So yesterday, and maybe some of you here today were also at our topic that we were presenting on, the conversation we were having yesterday on moral injury. One reason why we want to explore like the topic of moral injury more is because it's a way to understand also what impacts people not being able to show up effectively to peer support or other spaces in their lives, where the solutions aren't just resting on individuals themselves. It's not just the answer of, oh, well, you've got to up your self-care. And if you can't do that, maybe you can't hack this job. It's actually asking like, no, what can we do together to change these systems so that there isn't moral injury or ethical violations or frameworks that are so at odds with each other, and decreasing people's quality of life and feeling like they're doing harm in their work. And so with that too, looking at that peer support is a wonderful thing that has healing potential and is a source of healing and revitalization for so many. We know that. And also just providing that one-on-one peer support, emotional support can only get us so far sometimes when we're facing, still that question of like, and I'm being evicted during the middle of a pandemic, and I'm being retaliated at in my workspace due to racism, right? And so it is through working in tandem with collective efforts that meet people's basic needs where that peer support can go even further, right? Where we can genuinely show up for people where they are in their lives without just saying the words that are validating. So how are we actually bringing our communities together?
Perfect. Thanks, Brittany.
Yep.
So we also wanted to name, and I'm just going to read this verbatim and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. But not all disruption has to be constructive. And we're not here to tone police anyone or to put forward parameters in which people from marginalized communities need to frame their experiences. Sharing lived experiences and naming harms that have occurred in order to cause disruptions and disrupting systems for the sake of disruption is also great and something that we support. Often, when we're talking about constructive disruption in this case and in this space, we're going to be talking about how can we do it in a way that leads to systems reform, that can lead to building new systems, that can lead to collective care, community care, and supporting each other. And sometimes it's important just to disrupt things so that people know that harm is being caused. I don't want anyone to feel like there is an obligation to take that next step if as members of marginalized communities beyond just disruption. The amount of emotional labor, the actual labor that we're asking of people to not only cause disruption, but then also to advance systemic reform or to build new systems or to keep showing up in these spaces where they're actively being harmed is a lot to put on people. And we've seen that really happening consistently, particularly after protesting and uprisings last year, where, Black community members were really looked at and being asked to do a lot of emotional labor, oftentimes for free, oftentimes on their own time. And that just isn't something that they have an obligation to do. And so sometimes it's okay to just say, I'm here, I've been harmed. I want you to know as a system, you're causing harm, but I'm not going to be the person who's going to fix it, or I'm not going to be the person who's going to tell you what needs to be done. You need to do that work on your own. Or there are people that you can pay to come and do that work, but it's not going to be me. And so we wanted to name as well that is great. And we're here to support that.
Yeah, there's also other pieces to disruption, and we'll get into like what we mean by constructive disruption a bit more on the next slide. But there can be this equating between the word disruption and destruction. So again, that's disruption and destruction, and they are not the same. And so what can happen in disrupting systems or the way systems are operating, if they are causing harm, is it can put the brakes on. As Tim mentioned too, like it can call attention to the fact that things are happening instead of just letting the status quo go on unnamed. And also, like, while the brakes are on, alternatives, creative potential can have a chance to breathe a bit, right? And so there can be that space. So let's talk about constructive disruption.
Yes. What an excellent transition.
Cool. So kind of what we mean by this is that, we're advancing towards systems reform or change, while centering things like mutual accountability, integrity in ourselves and in the places we operate. And we acknowledge too here that like disruption is an element of working towards things like equity and justice, supporting the development of services, supports communities that are impacted by the systems that you're operating within or adjacent to. Like, if we're actually working towards equity and justice, anti-oppression work, anti-racist work, we have to be okay with disruption and being uncomfortable. That is what's called on us to do that. The thing is, these systems of oppression are so deeply ingrained that meaningful change in people's lives is disruptive. And so we need to own that, and we need to identify that it's something that we can value together, we can move together towards. So anything else, Tim, you think?
I think it's important to name in here as well when we're talking about disruption and us acting as systems disruptors, understanding the difference between being uncomfortable and actually being harmed. When we're talking about racism, or we're talking about oppression, or we're talking about transphobia, is it uncomfortable to talk about those things? Or are you actually being harmed? And the same with these systems that we're talking about and the people who work within them. When we put forward the idea that, hey, the system has caused harm, is the person that you're talking to just uncomfortable with this topic, or are they actually being harmed in the space? And for the most part, particularly when we're talking to white people in positions of power in these systems, they're uncomfortable, but they're going to tell you that they're being harmed. And so understanding how to navigate through those spaces and being prepared for when that arises, as someone who has a lot of personal experience with that, is very important when it comes to being able to engage in disruption at systems level, and being prepared for kind of pushback. And we'll talk more about, what are repercussions looking like, what are ramifications, and what does it mean to actually do this, and what should we be prepared for. But really that difference between harm and discomfort, and the weaponization and of those two things, I think is really important to understand when we talk about how people respond when we're putting forward ideas of reform.
Yeah, I think there's one other element here too, like in that word disrupt, is that by engaging in this work, which is very much in alignment with peer support work, right? Peer support has its roots in the ways various communities have survived in the face of oppression and horrible situations. There was also, a lot of the groundwork laid for like professional peer support areas now also came out of the deinstitutionalization movement. Like these are large efforts for change where people with shared lived experience came together towards disrupting things. Like people used civil disobedience, stuff like that. It's not only us who take on this work of constructive disruption who are disrupting other things, right? By engaging in this work, there's also a lot of us that needs to be okay with an internal disruption. So that can be really hard when maybe we are people with also various intersecting identities or experiences of marginalization, or having experienced moral injury, to say, oh, I'm okay with more disruption or unstableness in my life, right? But in order to engage in this work, we have to be willing to be held mutually accountable. We have to hold ourselves accountable, have a consistent reflection as well in this. And so I want to also hold that as an element of this work.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate what Donald put in the chat. I like to ask my fellows, when they say they feel threatened, do you feel unsafe or do you feel uncomfortable? And that's such a good question, and such a good way to kind of reflect back to what are we really feeling? What's at the core of how you're responding to this suggestion right now. Yeah. So the next piece of this is going to be breakout rooms, where we're sending you off together to chat about things. And I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I know that we info dumped on you for 25 minutes. And so wanted to check in to hear what's resonating with people. What questions do you have? Before we ask you to talk about this with yourself, I want to make sure that we're all understanding kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah. And so if you want to, you can unmute and let us know kind of where you're at right now, if you have any thoughts, or if you want to share like just a couple words of where you're at after this initial discussion in the chat, feel free to do that as well.
And if you're like, I'm good to go, just give us a thumbs up and we will not sit in silence.
Oh, and thank you for that note, Shane.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try to get both of you in the same room.
Penny says it felt like it was a few seconds. That's because I speak so quick that we got through it super quick. Excited, engaged, awesome, perfect. And I saw a bunch of thumbs up as well. So I'm feeling like we're good to go to move on if you are good with that, Brittany.
Yeah, sorry, just trying to, I'm editing the rooms a little bit here.
Sure.
And Tim, you can ignore your room request.
So what we're going to do is send you into breakout rooms of around like maximum of 5 people. We really want this to be kind of a smaller group discussion. We have some discussion questions that I'm going to put in the chat and that we're going to ask you to talk about. You'll be in breakout rooms together for 15 minutes. If you're not feeling up to it, you just are not in a space where you want to share, or you are not able to participate for whatever reason, please feel free to just stay in the main room. And it's definitely no obligation. So, oops. I'm going to go ahead and put these questions in the chat. And the first is, what is the goal of systems disruption? So from your standpoint and as a group, what do you guys think the goal is? The second is, should we work with existing systems when they've caused so much harm? Why or why not? So do you think we should continue to work with systems? Do you feel like we should completely divest? Do you feel like we should work towards reform? Is it a balance of both? And then how can we disrupt systems? So what are some things that you all feel like you could do? What could you see happening collectively? What do you think? So we're going to send you into these breakout rooms now. If you need help, there's like a call for help button that you're welcome to use. We'll keep an eye on the time and send you a reminder when you've got like 2 minutes left. And then just so that you are all aware, once we come back from breakout rooms, we'll take a 5-minute break before doing a large group share out. So Brittany, if you could send everyone into breakout rooms, that would be perfect.
Here we go. And we'd love to hear what what were your biggest takeaways? Just really briefly, we want to hear from at least 2 people here, kind of what your biggest takeaways were from your conversations in the breakout rooms.
Well, I think in ours, we had 2 of us. I work for the State Department of Corrections, and we had the one who works for the state mental health hospital. And then we had a not-profit guy or gentleman. So the differences between the state runs versus the not-for-profits is evident. And
there's definitely needs to be a consistent, concerted effort of bridging that gap to ensure that everybody is getting, fair, equal treatment. And it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of people stepping up and not afraid to fail and not afraid to ruffle some feathers to make it happen.
Yeah, it's acknowledging that there's some risk involved in all of this. Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, and also it is interesting to think about, hear from people working with state agencies, also people in nonprofits, and also acknowledging too that nonprofits are not like bastions of liberatory freedom in regards to advancing all of these things like equity and justice and anti-racism, that like with needing to compete for funding on an ongoing basis, acknowledging some of the hierarchical structures of nonprofit settings, like there are similar challenges, right? They're extensions of these systems. And so, yeah, how do we learn from each other? How do we support each other in advancing towards these things? While also acknowledging and naming the flaws in even those sections that seem a bit more like forward thinking, or where there seems to be some more possibilities. Yeah. And what else came up for people in this breakout room?
I'll chime in. Excuse me. In the group that I was in, 4 of us this time, excuse me, I think we came to understand that we all have a role to play. And that to the question, how can we build new systems? What I heard from each person was their effort where they were, in what they were doing. And what I think we get to see is that there are different tiers or different levels or different areas that we all are doing things. My contribution to the conversation is that with respect to this question of, how can we build new systems? My response was tearing down the one that exists. So the perspective that I have actually is destroying this system, dismantling this system to create something different. As I shared that, for example, as a person of African descent, I live in a country that is racist. I live in a state of colonization. And in this state, as an African person, I am totally dominated. In other words, forced into a situation of dependency where everything, in terms of resources, institutions, all are controlled by an imposing force, white racism. So for me, when I hear, for example, equity, inclusion, diversity, it's generally proffered within the context of colonization. Okay, well, you still be colonized, but we are going to offer you equity, inclusion, and the like. And it reminds me of a statement of a great leader, Honorable Malcolm X, who said that if you stick a knife in my back 12 inches and you just simply pull it out 3 inches, the knife is still in my back. And so for me, pulling a knife out 3 inches, diversity, inclusion, equity doesn't do anything. Really, because the problem still persists. So from my perspective, it would be destroying that system of racism, the system of colonization, and moving to something new. And I do hear, from the beginning of this, the conversation of equity, inclusion, diversity, and the conversation that everyone has shared, specifically in the group that I was in, where folks were looking at transforming the systems that they have encountered or are in. The guy, Jose, who talked about transforming the prison system or our relationships to prison systems. And one other, I don't remember the lady's name right now, who talked about her role in bringing something better for the children that she works with, mixed race children that she works with. So.
Yeah, I really appreciate everything that you said and named, and I think it's all really important pieces, particularly the quote from Malcolm X, which is huge. And I'm with you, and I think a lot of people are with you in terms of, personally, I would love to also just see the whole system ripped down and something else just completely built in its place. That for me is the only logical solution. Really, anything else is slapping kind of a band-aid on it, and is really not acknowledging the level and depth of harm that's been caused, not just recently because we're talking about equity and justice now, but since this country was founded, like you said, and where it came from, and who was in power, and how it has imperialized and colonized various other parts of the world as well since we've existed. So I'm with you, and as part of that, yeah, that it does always bring me back to that question of what next then. Once the system is ripped down, and once we have something, everything is gone, what do we build in its place? And for me, I don't look at it as a standpoint of like, oh no, what are we going to do? But I really look at it as like, this is exciting. What could be instead? What could we create together to replace what exists now that meets our needs? And I think you're spot on in saying kind of that the equity, inclusion, and justice and diversity pieces are kind of just buzzwords, and for as far as they might get us, like you said, they're just advancing us into harmful systems. And where does that really lead us? So I'm just so appreciative that you're willing to name all of that. I think it really resonates with me, and I'm hopeful that it resonates with others on the call as well.
Yeah, same. It really is. I think what came up for me too while you were speaking was it's like sometimes it's like this rebranding sometimes that people try to do of the current systems. It's like the goal is not to make the current systems more palatable. It's to actually transform our society into something that works for people and is justice oriented. So like if we're talking about justice, what does that actually mean? And current systems with some buzzwords is not the answer, right? For me, I make sense of my own life in that like I am very much like in along these questions, I am for like a revolutionary approach. And also I recognize too, like in my work, like how I sell my labor, right? I try to make a difference in the places I am, right? And so it's like the question of the reforms that can be made along the way to dismantling these systems to create something new. Like I picture that as like, you know, the beautiful growth that happens after a burn, right? Or the beautiful growth that happens when a tree falls, right? Is that this question of how do we pursue reforms while also not being reformist in our approach? How do we take these non-reformist reforms, like have an eye towards that complete systemic change, right? But also make meaningful changes in people's lives when we can do so along the way. Yeah, big stuff.
Yeah, I
So
appreciate.
with that, I think we should.
I just wanted to really quick say that I think we'll just skip the last pieces. I don't think we have time for them, but I wanted to also I just touch on what Rhea put in the chat. Oh no, I'm sorry, it was Shane. So many people fear tearing the system down without something ready to stand in its place, in part because their lives aren't necessarily like in crisis right now. In a way, folks with more privilege have time to wait, and I think that that's really huge. You know, we often feel like, well, if there's nothing in place to catch people, then harm will be caused, but harm is occurring now. Right? People are being killed by the police now. People are being failed by the mental health and substance use service systems right now. So even if we do wait until something else is built for fear of causing harm, that system that exists that's causing harm right now is still going to do that, right? And so how do we balance those two things, and how do we get into one that meets people's needs just more effectively? And so I was really grateful to see that as well from Rhea. Yeah.
And our last slides were basically kind of acknowledging that when you're pursuing this disruptive or this disruption, right, with an eye towards creating something new, there are going to be repercussions. And so it's basically asking the question of, what are you willing to risk in this? Are you willing to take stances, take actions that will put your funding in question, that will put your job on the line, right? How far can you go? And I guess that also like goes back to that question in the breakout room of how do we use our own places of power and privilege, right? Some of us can take more risks than others. Some of us, if we lose our jobs, if we lose our funding, we'll land on our feet softer than others. And so how can we do this while recognizing that, and also like supporting like connection to community? Because it's really easy to get kind of like, well, I don't care, I'm okay with anything. But then we can also like, in our recklessness, like lose sight of our community and holding each other in mind, and I don't know. I'm losing my words at this point, but I hope that kind of comes across.
Yes, making sure that when we're in and we have the ability to affect change, we're not moving so quickly, so strongly, so independently that we're actually having a negative impact on the communities that we're meant to be supporting, particularly when those communities maybe want something else, or want want to be the ones affecting change and not have you be the one affecting change. And
Right.
just how do we take all of that into consideration when we're looking at that? And how do we use positions of power to support people who want to participate in affecting change, but maybe need a little bit more support to do so? So if somebody is going to, you know, risk their funding, how do we create it so that if they lose that funding, the community is there to catch them, and they're not losing their housing then as a result of that, and so that change can happen. I also recognize that we're right up against time, and I want to be respectful of your all time, everyone's time. I just say that I think I can speak for both of us for once and just say that we're really grateful for everyone's contributions. I know I'm walking away feeling excited and energized to see so much great input and excitement about this topic. And it was great to be in this space together with you.
Thank you all.